Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. I'm Yamiche Alcindor reporting from Cornwall, England. I'm here traveling with President Biden during his first foreign trip as commander-in-chief. And he has a lot on his agenda and a lot to work through after his predecessor, former President Donald Trump, strained relationships with our European allies. Now, there's going to be a lot of focus on the state of democracy in the U.S. and around the world, and a lot of talk about how U.S. adversaries like Russia and China are feeling emboldened. Now, I want to bring in our friend Ed O'Keefe, senior White House correspondent and political correspondent for CBS News. He's there in our studio in Washington, D.C., keeping the moderator seat warm for me. Thanks so much for being here, Ed.
Hey, Yamiche, so great to be here. We miss you, but glad you're able to join us tonight. And Vice President Kamala Harris was also abroad. As I saw firsthand this week traveling with her, she faced challenges as she visited Central America in hopes of addressing the root causes of migration. Joining us tonight with more on all of these stories are three essential reporters covering it all. Jonathan Martin, national political correspondent for the New York Times, and joining me here in the studio, Anna Palmer, founder of Punchbowl News, a political newsletter, and host of the Daily Punch podcast, and Vivian Salama, national security reporter for the Wall Street Journal. But first, Yamiche, let's turn to you. Ultimately, what is President Biden hoping to accomplish on this trip, and what have we learned so far about how he's going to do that?
Well, President Biden really wants to reaffirm the ties that the U.S. has to our European allies. A lot of these European leaders were traumatized because former President Trump really did have a lot of hostility toward NATO and G7. He even openly questioned whether or not these organizations needed to exist. So there's a lot of strain there. And I've been talking to White House officials, including National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. They say that the way that President Biden is really going to try to reassure our allies is going to be showing action. And you already see the U.S. now pledging 500 million COVID-19 doses of the vaccine to struggling nations. That's also going to be coupled with the G7 together donating 1 billion. So what you see there, billion doses that is. So what you see there is the Europe and the U.S. trying to work together to try to reassure the world that we are in fact working together. I will say though that these vaccine donations, they aren't going to be happening overnight. They aren't going to be happening for some time. And they did come with the U.S. facing a lot of pressure to do more on the global stage when it came to vaccine doses.
Yeah, the incredible thing about that timeline is that most of the world may not see a vaccine in their arm until next spring. One of the incredible developments of this week. But, he's in the UK now, Yamiche. He heads to Brussels after that. But everyone's waiting for this meeting with President Putin next week. What are the most important issues at stake as the American and Russian leaders meet?
Well, this is going to be an 8-day, 3-country trip for Joe Biden, President Biden. But the big show, as you said, the big event is going to be in Geneva, Switzerland, when he meets with the Russian president. And there are a lot on the agenda there. The thing that President Biden wants to keep saying is that he's going to have a firmer tone with Putin than his predecessor, Donald Trump, did, who really was seen as very cozy to the Russian president. President Biden is going to be wanting to talk about human rights. He's going to be talking about ransomwares and hacks that were carried out by criminal gangs reportedly stationed in Russia. So there's going to be a lot of talk about that. And European leaders are really watching this and trying to understand how European allies can really trust the U.S. again. And the stance against Russia is going to be a key thing that they're going to be looking at going forward.
Here in Washington, Vivian, this is all coming as President Biden is trying to draw lines in the global battle between democracy and authoritarianism. This is actually something he speaks about quite frequently, right?
That's right. This has been sort of the overarching frame of his foreign policy agenda as he's come into office, is talking about the need for democracies to work together to kind of confront this rising sense of authoritarianism in the world, with Russia and China sort of looming in the backdrop of that description. And of course, one of the things that he's really worked to do is to try to get allies on the same page. And he talks the talk certainly that the Europeans want to be hearing about multilateralism, supporting NATO, supporting the G7, something that his predecessor, Donald Trump, he would kind of throw peanuts at them, but not so much embrace these organizations, wholeheartedly. And so he is certainly there and making allies a lot more comfortable. But two things we're going to be looking at in the coming days and months to come. Do we get deliverables from the trip? We see vaccines coming out now. Certainly these countries are going to be working together. But also, President Biden, despite the fact that he talks the talk, there's going to be a lot of really tough issues to get over. The Germans don't agree with him on a Russian pipeline that's going to Germany, and it's a very, very controversial issue right there. That's something that they're going to have a hard time discussing. President Macron of France also pushing back on this idea of a united crackdown on China. He says that that is a really risky move. And so those are a couple of issues that you're going to be looking for as the president tries to kind of pursue this policy of his.
It's always fascinating when they all get together because they're also all in different political cycles. Some have just won, some are getting ready for re-election, some are leaving, like Chancellor Merkel. So always makes for fascinating theater. Jonathan, while the president's abroad, there are fresh headlines back here at home reminding the world of what it used to be like. The New York Times was first to report that Justice Department officials were seeking the phone records of Democratic members of the House Intelligence Committee. These reports of authoritarian-style moves against the former president's critics seem to throw a wrench a bit into the president's push to promote democracy, especially since it's now Biden's Justice Department that's cleaning this up, right?
Well, and you hear this, or certainly our government hears it all the time from our allies and adversaries abroad, Ed, which is how dare you lecture us when democracy was sliding in your own country. And this will be the kind of thing that people abroad seize on. Again, even our friends and certainly our adversaries to say that, clean up your own house, your own mess. And it does create challenges. Biden clearly wants to move on from this Trump, but this is the kind of thing that Democrats are, especially on the Hill, are going to want accountability of. And for Republicans who want to move on from Trump, this is just one more piece of evidence that it's going to be difficult for them to do that, given what happened in the last 4 years, and given the fact that much of their base, Ed, doesn't want to move on from President Trump. They still view him as the leader of their party. So, bottom line, the long shadow of Donald J. Trump still looms here in mid-June of 2021.
And as that shadow looms, Anna, specifically in the wake of these reports, what is Congress planning to do? How is it responding to all this?
Yeah, it's not just going to go away. It's not going to be a story that just disappears, right? We've already seen Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, as well as Senator Dick Durbin, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, calling for former Attorney Generals Jeff Sessions, Bill Barr to testify, and saying even if they don't testify, they plan to try to subpoena them. Of course, in the Senate, it always comes down to this 50-50 Senate where power is, fleeting, and so they need to find at least one Republican to support that. If not, I think that they'll punt it over to the House, which clearly doesn't have those same issues. An investigation will happen there. And I do think what's interesting to just note is the fact that you've already heard from the Biden Justice Department. They are clearly trying to draw a line in the sand to say, that was President Trump. We are a different unit entirely. And they're now saying, we would like the IG to do an investigation. That's not going to be enough for Capitol Hill, but that's going to happen in tandem.
The IG being the Inspector General of the Justice Department, yeah. And they've had to play cleanup and sort of put to bed what the Trump administration was up to. And really striking report, again, as the president tries to talk about democracy versus autocracy. And as he is in the United Kingdom through Sunday, before he heads on to Brussels and Geneva next week. After a stop to meet NATO leaders, Biden is scheduled to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. The meeting comes amid tensions over Russia's treatment of political opponents, its actions in Ukraine, and recent hacks into U.S. infrastructure. On Wednesday, the president previewed the summit. Here's what he said.
The United States will respond in a robust and meaningful way when the Russian government engages in harmful activities.
And late Thursday, former President Donald Trump issued an extraordinary statement, recalling his own meeting with President Putin, claiming that in 2018, quote, the United States won much. He wished luck to President Biden, adding, quote, don't fall asleep during the meeting, and please give my warmest regards. Yamiche, the former president, clearly trying to overshadow the current president. How on earth is that playing over there as these meetings get underway?
Well, it really underscores former President Trump's comments here. It really underscores that Joe Biden has a lot of work to cut out for him. Now, you have, of course, Jonathan talking about this long shadow of President Trump still looming here. And that is really true because it underscores that 75 million Americans still supported President Trump, former President Trump, even after all of the things that we saw, all of the unpredictability during these NATO and G7 meetings. So there really is this feeling among European leaders that they don't don't know if they can really trust where American democracy is. I've been talking to experts who say it could take several election cycles for people to really see American democracy as going back to the Joe Biden vision of the world. That said, this is a high-stakes meeting, right? This is Joe Biden in some ways giving stature to President Putin here, making the case that he wants to meet with him one-on-one. He got big cheers here in the UK when he landed and told U.S. troops that he wanted to tell Vladimir Putin the things that he came to tell him. Even though there were no details there, he was really implying that he was going to take a firm stance against the Russian president. And I remember being in Helsinki, Finland, when President Trump stood before reporters and said he believed the Russian president over U.S. intelligence agencies when it came to meddling in U.S. elections. So that's the work that Joe Biden has to work through. He has to change that tone, and we're going to see a changed tone here. But I think U.S. officials, especially White House officials that I talked to, they're trying to lower expectations for what might come out of this meeting. And you're also hearing that the real goal here is for Joe Biden to just really underscore that the U.S. is strong, that even though things might have shifted during the Trump era, that America is back. So there will be real questions afterwards, but President Biden has a very clear agenda here.
Yeah, Vivian, I kept hearing the White House National Security Advisor say this week they're meeting because they're in disagreement, because there are things to discuss in person, not because he's trying to elevate him and thinks of him as a friend. But Putin does seem to be, in essence, trolling Biden ahead of the meeting. There's this Russian court decision that outlaws opposition leader Alexei Navalny and his political party. There are reports that Russia's getting ready to sell Iran some satellite technology. This is clearly designed to sort of rattle the United States ahead of this meeting. How are they responding to it all?
It cannot be stated enough at how shrewd President Putin is as a negotiator and just his general tactics. Remember, he is a former KGB official, and he is very, very good at sort of figuring out who the person who's going to be at the other side of the negotiating table is. So he is basically trolling very intentionally President Biden ahead of this meeting to show, you know what, I can do whatever I want, and it's not up to you to tell me how to run my country. And so the way that President Biden is going about this, and the way that a lot of the European allies that we have are looking at this, is that China is perhaps one of the biggest challenges that the world faces. But right now, Russia is the biggest threat. And so President Biden is getting a lot of pushback about this meeting, saying, you know, you're dignifying his actions, and you should not be meeting with him. But he says it's because he's the biggest threat that we need to meet face-to-face so that he can confront him on issues like election meddling, like cyber attacks on critical infrastructure and on government software. And so whether or not they come out with any agreements or not, it remains to be seen. President Biden really likes to stress that he had a relationship with President Putin before coming to office. He was the most skilled at foreign policy, he used to say on the campaign. And so we'll see if that translates to real results with Russia to ease the tensions right now.
They're not allies, they're not enemies. Is frenemies fair, or is it something worse than that?
I mean, you could call it that, but really the way that the administration is framing it is that they are competitors who we want to cooperate with, and same goes for China.